Hi again, this is Sir Jet, and I welcome you to part 2 of our lesson on political globalization. Let us review part 1. Part 1, we saw how the world evolved from nomadic tribes practicing patriarchy to being city-states, kingdoms, and empires, and mega empires. And we see a world order of Europe being the center and the other continents being the periphery. Today we will continue the story. What happened next from that point? Okay, so without further ado, let's go to our computer to see the birth of democracy and communism. Okay. So we have here a subtitle which says how the monarchy gave birth to democracy and how the Industrial Revolution gave birth to communism. So if you remember our early lectures, we talked about the forms of government, okay, and now we will be mentioning them here. Democracy and communism. So it started with the monarchy. So let's go back in time when the places in Europe were being ruled by kings, or to be precise, emperors. And in that kind of setup, it's a one-man rule. The tendency is absolute power corrupts absolutely. What I'm trying to say is that many kingdoms in that time were bad, or many kings and emperors were bad. The people didn't like them. They were despotic. They ruled with an iron hand. If you criticize them, they will put you to jail or even kill you. And so the people would just have to bear with the king and wait probably for the next king and to come, to be born and to come, and just hope that that king would be a good or a better king than the bad king. But if it's not the case, then it's another time to wait and to really have a hard time. So most of the kings ruled like that in Europe, and so the people started to be discontented. Okay, and it gave birth to a new political system called democracy. Okay, the first place where it happened was in France. There was a revolution called the French Revolution, because the king was so bad, the people started to be angry and then armed themselves and stormed the palace. The people were just ordinary farmers. They most of them don't have weapons or guns. They just stormed the palace using their farm tools like shovels and forks. And there were so many that the people or the soldiers guarding the palace could not contain them, could not repel them. So they were able to get inside the palace and kill the king and the queen and topple the monarchy. And that's the French Revolution. They replaced the monarchy with a new form of government called democracy. And we know that democracy means rule of the people. So the royal family, the royal class was eliminated, and in its place the people put representatives to run the government for them. And we call that body of people, okay, parliament. So there was no more monarchy because the king was killed by the peasants, and then the peasants selected a leader from every town or every province. They elected their leaders, and those representatives gather in this hall to do the nitty-gritty of governance. They debate on new laws. They decide on matters about the government. They are not royal-blooded people. They just come from the towns, elected by the people, and that's what we call democracy. Okay? This is the parliament. Democracy in the sense that rule of the people. It's no longer rule of the king. And so that's how France evolved into a democratic state in the 1700s. Okay? The French Revolution became a model for the rest of Europe, because other European countries who were discontented with their monarchs also staged their own version of a revolution. Ordinary people would storm the king and topple him and replace his government with a parliament. And it spread like wildfire across Europe. Revolutions or democratic revolutions caused many kings to lose their absolute powers. And some kings even resigned before the revolution would come to his country and topple him, because he's afraid. He saw the other countries, the other kingdoms fall because of the democratic revolutions, and he felt, or some kings felt, that one day my people might do the same to me, and before that happens, I don't want me to get killed. So the king would resign and order the formation of a parliament. Okay, so the people would follow the cue of the king. They would select ordinary people among themselves to be representatives sent to the parliament, and then the king would step down. His powers are just figurehead powers, but the nitty-gritty of governance goes to the hands of the parliament. Do you remember or recognize a country in Europe right now with that kind of system? A figurehead monarch and a parliament being the powerful ruler of the land? Yes, you're correct. The United Kingdom, or UK, is like that. Okay, the king resigned, and on his place a parliament was formed, and the king preserved his life and his line. Up to now, they have a figurehead monarch plus a parliament who is the powerful one ruling the country. So other countries in Europe have the same setup. A democracy, a concept wherein there is equality of people, and the people have the voice to say what they want in the decision-making body called the parliament. There are now more liberties for citizens. You can criticize the government and you don't go to jail. And so that is the system that governed Europe, or many European states, after the 1700s up to the 1800s. Now, later on, the world transitioned into the Industrial Revolution. People started to invent machines for mass production. And so there were many factories all over Europe. This is London, okay? And you see many factories. And the factories manufacture everything, anything, okay, that the human inventor would think of. And that is the period called Industrial Revolution. Okay, before there were no factories, now there are so many. And not only factories, but also choo-choo trains. The factories were powered by coal, and so are mass transportation, like the choo-choo train. And there is also the choo-choo ship, okay? And it's also powered by coal. So machines were invented for mass production of canned goods, clothes, um, everything that you see in the household, they are produced by machines, by factories. And also farming became mechanized. Tractors, harvesting machines, they were no longer pulled by horses or carabaos, but they were being pulled by machines. So everything was mechanized beginning that time, the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. And the stuff that powers the machines is coal. And coal is it's like charcoal, except that it's made of rock. Charcoal, what we have here in the Philippines is charcoal, and it's made of wood. Now, this coal is mined from the ground, and it's very, very destructive to the environment. The smoke that emits from the coal factories are really dark, and it causes lung disease. It causes the sky to be dark, and even some butterflies became extinct because of this smoke coming from the factories. And not only the environment that was at a disadvantage during the Industrial Revolution, but also the laborers, the people working in the factories. They had poor labor practices during that time. It's not like our time wherein we have a labor law. But during that time, there were no labor laws. Can you imagine? If you're a factory worker, there's no law to protect you from being overworked and underpaid. So the factory workers then, they don't have overtime pay. They don't have a 13th month pay. They don't have a hazard pay or clothing allowance or maternity leave or sick leave. They don't have a promotion. They don't have anything that we enjoy today as members of the labor force. And so what happened was that the laborers became so miserable. Okay, the poor became poor, or they remained even poorer, while the factory owners became richer and richer because of the exploitation of the laborers. They just sit pretty in their mansions while the laborers toil so hard in the factories. And this also made, the Industrial Revolution also made the Western European empires more powerful economically and politically. Because from the colonies, that's where they get the raw materials, and then the seat of power is Europe, as we have mentioned in the world order. That's where you have the factories, and if you manufacture more and more, your economy grows bigger and bigger, and so your empire becomes stronger. And so Europe became even richer during this time. So places like England, France, Spain, Germany, Belgium, and Holland or the Netherlands became world powers even more because of the Industrial Revolution. They are the only ones who had factories, but the colonies, they don't have factories. And later on, the United States of America became like the Western European powers because they also underwent the Industrial Revolution in their place. America started to build factories as well, and it made them a rich nation or a rich state, just like their counterparts in Europe. Now, because of this Industrial Revolution woes, communism was born. There's a guy who observed all these malpractices, all this injustice happening in the Industrial Revolution, and that's the man. Who's he? He's not Santa Claus, although his favorite color is also red. His name is Karl Marx. He is a book author, a philosopher. He's a German, but he resided in England. And just the same, Germany and England were seats of the Industrial Revolution, and he saw what was happening in Europe in the Industrial Revolution. He observed that there were two social classes that are very defined, and they are struggling against each other. What are these two social classes? The capitalists on one side and the masses on the other. Karl Marx called them the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. These are French words. Bourgeoisie means the rich elite, the rulers, because they have capital. Okay? And on the other side, you have the proletariat, the factory workers, the poor people, the peasants, the ones being exploited by the bourgeoisie. And incidentally, bourgeoisie is the source of the Spanish word burgués. Okay? And you hear it very often here in the Philippines. Okay? So the rich, they are the capitalists, they own the factory, they have money to put up the business. Okay? They are the factory owners. While the masses, they are the working class, the laborers, the labor force, and they are the exploited ones. And there's a struggle between the two classes. And this is 1800s in Europe. Now, because of his observations, Karl Marx started to dream of a society wherein there's harmony. Okay? And how does he make that happen? There must be no more social classes. Men must be equal. Okay? No rich, no poor. So he called it utopia. Okay? No more exploitation in the classless society. Now, Karl Marx put all those writings in two books. Okay? The Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. And the whole system that he invented is called communism. Okay? A classless society, the government would make sure that nobody is above the other by distributing the wealth of the state among the citizens equally. Now, the sad thing about Karl Marx is that he died without seeing the fruit of his dreams. Nobody read his books during his lifetime. The books just gathered dust in the shelves. It was half a century later when the idea of Marx was picked up by somebody and was applied in real life. And who is that guy who picked up the book of Karl Marx? That's him. Where is this? It's in Russia. Okay, so communism was never applied in Marx's lifetime, but it was half a century later, 1917 Russia, that a guy named Vladimir Lenin put up the Russian Revolution and applied communism in his country. At that time, 1917, Russia was an empire. They have an emperor called the Tsar. And they also have factories, okay, and peasants who are disgruntled. So Vladimir Lenin formed an armed group out of these disgruntled citizens, and they stormed the palace, killed the king and the queen, the members of the royal family. Okay, they eliminated them. Okay, and put up communism. And that's the start of the Soviet era in Russia. So when you say Soviet, that means communist. So no more monarchy, just communism in Russia. Now, how did Lenin implemented the classless society? It must begin with the confiscation of all the wealth of Russia. So it's a very bloody process. You have to have an iron hand to confiscate all the wealth of the citizens, because some wealthy people would not yield their wealth to the armed forces of Lenin. See, you're very rich, and then here's Lenin trying to get your riches. You just don't want to give it, so Lenin would have to kill you to get your wealth. And so are the other people who would oppose the communist army. And so all communist countries began with a bloody revolution. Okay? The shedding of blood, because people would naturally oppose the government. Okay, and so in communism you have to really force your way. If you're the government, force your way with an iron-fisted approach to distribute equally the wealth of the people. And so it happened in Russia, equal distribution of wealth. Plus, Russia invaded 14 neighboring countries to spread the idea of communism. And so Russia invaded places like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, and they put up a system, a communist government system in those republics, put the republics together into one state called the USSR, or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So that is 15 republics rolled into one communist government under Vladimir Lenin and his successors. So that is the USSR. Communism is now being applied in a large part of the world. Now, another big country followed the example of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, and that's him, Mao Zedong. In China, 1950, Mao Zedong followed the Russian model. So he also wanted to put up a classless society in China. So Mao put together an army that attacked the government at that time, led by Chiang Kai-shek. So Chiang Kai-shek has a democratic republic in China, and Mao Zedong is communist. He drove away Chiang Kai-shek, chased him all the way here, and then Chiang Kai-shek hopped over to that little island called Taiwan and continued the democratic republic that he used to handle in mainland China. Okay, so today Taiwan is democratic, and then this larger part of or this place called mainland China, the territory of Mao Zedong, became communist. He stopped pursuing Chiang Kai-shek and just concentrated on building the communist government here in the mainland. So now we have two Chinas, a communist China and a democratic China. So Chiang Kai-shek is in Taiwan, Mao Zedong is in mainland China, and he followed the example of Vladimir Lenin, put up a communist government in mainland China, confiscated the wealth of the people, distribute it equally among all the citizens, and so we have communism being applied in a very, very large part of the world. The USSR and China, two very large countries that are following a communist government. So that is part 2 of our lesson called political globalization. Alright, so I will now summarize what we have discussed so far today. Alright, so we have seen how communism and democracy were born. Okay? Democracy is an offshoot of the monarchy because people were so unhappy with the monarchy that they put up a new government called democracy. A revolution, the French Revolution, sprouted out of the monarchy, the system of the monarchy, and now we have a parliament, democracy getting born, or being born out of the monarchy. In the same way, we have the Industrial Revolution giving birth to communism. Because in the Industrial Revolution, there were also unhappy people. One of them is Karl Marx, and he thought of an idea of a classless society. And so communism was born out of the Industrial Revolution. So that is the lesson today. The birth of communism and democracy. I hope it's very clear to you, because in part 3, we will continue the story how these two, communism and democracy, had a big competition between themselves. Okay, which one is the better political ideology? That is the lesson in part 3, which will happen next meeting. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.